There's nothing that the CIA loves more than an inexperienced president, because they can recruit that president, in air quotes, recruit that president by bringing him into the fold and saying, Mr. President, listen to the amazing things that we're doing around the world. And then that new president says, wow, these are incredible things that the CIA is doing. I'm going to be with the CIA. And then they know they can do anything they want anywhere in the world, and there's nobody to stop them. Hi, I'm John Kiriakou, and welcome to Deep Focus. I did an interview earlier today with Ali Alizadeh, who is a London-based Iranian-British podcaster. Ali is one of the world's leading authorities on Iranian politics and society. And I wanted to cross-post this interview because I thought you'd enjoy it. So here it is.
John Kiriakou is a former CIA counterterrorism officer and senior investigator for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He was the first U.S. official to publicly confirm and detail the CIA's use of waterboarding, sparking national debate over torture. In 2012, he was sentenced to prison for leaking classified information, becoming one of the most well-known U.S. intelligence whistleblowers. Today, Kiriakou is a journalist, author, and frequent commentator on U.S. intelligence, covert operations, and state secrecy. Hi, John. Thanks a lot for accepting my invitation and giving us your precious time. As a first question,
thank you.
I want to know about Trump's relationship with CIA in the strike which happened yesterday on 3 of Iranian nuclear facilities. You've been inside the CIA and understand the dynamics between presidents and the intelligence community. In this case, how much of the strike on Iran was Trump's own decision, and how much might have been pushed, influenced, or quietly directed by elements within the national security state or deep state?
Oh, this is a very good and important question. And it's one that's not easily answered. When I first started working at the CIA 35 years ago, a little bit more than 35 years ago, there were several small branches that worked on Iran. There was an Iran branch in operations. There was an Iran branch in analysis, but it was no big deal, a couple of dozen people. Now there is something called Persia House, which has hundreds of employees, and their job 24 hours a day is to plan operations against Iran on the one hand. On the other hand, it's to analyze Iranian politics, Iranian economics, Iranian military activities, Iranian nuclear program, anything having to do with Iran. We're talking about hundreds of people dedicated to this. So on the one hand, you most definitely have the deep state pushing Donald Trump and the topmost officials around him to do something about Iran because they're obsessed with Iran, number one. Number two, saving face and projecting an air of strength and power is very, very important to Donald Trump. He wants to be seen as decisive, as strong, as willing to take risks. In the greater scheme of things, how much of a risk was it to send 2 bombers to bomb sites that have already been bombed? It's not a risk. But it makes him feel strong and tough. He gave a short address last night to the American people from the East Wing. Usually what he does is he sits at his desk in the Oval Office when he addresses the American people. Last night, he stood at the entrance to the East Room in the White House with the presidential hallway behind him. And standing behind him were the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense. He did that on purpose. He did that because that's what Barack Obama used to do. And Obama looked strong and tough and decisive. And so he took a page from Obama's playbook to talk about Iran and to threaten Iran more, to mock Iran. And so I think much of what we're seeing is theatrics. It's theatrics on the part of Donald Trump because he feels better projecting this air of strength. But on the other hand, he most definitely has the deep state pushing him. Remember, Presidents come and go every 4 years or every 8 years. But CIA leaders are there for decades, 20, 25, 30, even 35 years. And for them, it doesn't matter who the president is. And let me make one more point. I've said this a number of times in public venues, but I think it bears repeating. There's nothing that the CIA loves more than an inexperienced president, because they can recruit that president, in air quotes, recruit that president by bringing him into the fold and saying, Mr. President, listen to the amazing things that we're doing around the world. And then that new president says, wow, these are incredible things that the CIA is doing. I'm going to be with the CIA. And then they know they can do anything they want anywhere in the world, and there's nobody to stop them.
So in a sense, CIAs are there to groom presidents and to lure them
That's exactly right.
into what they want. So in a sense, a president doesn't have the absolute power to appoint the head of CIA and use CIA to his own benefit. Is the other way around as well.
There's almost no such thing as a CIA director who is an outsider. It doesn't exist. Once they're sucked in by the bureaucracy, by the actual deep state, they become a part of that deep state and they help to perpetuate it. The last time we had a true outsider as the CIA director was 1977, when Admiral Stansfield Turner was appointed by President Jimmy Carter, and then he immediately started to fire people. It's been since 1977 that we've had a director with the guts to do something like that.
And so that takes us to the next question. How much of this CIA deep establishment, which can drag and lure the president to left and right, how much of it is connected and influenced by AIPAC and by the Israeli lobby?
That's a good question. The answer is that it's not necessarily directly influenced. I can tell you very seriously, from all my years at the CIA, I was there for 15 years, I never met any CIA officer who was pro-Israel. Never. It's crazy to think. There's great sympathy for the Arabs in the CIA. We all served in the Middle East. We all love the Arabs and Arab culture and Arab history and Arab literature, and we become
you yourself,
great
I
supporters.
believe you served in Yemen, and which other countries?
Well, I served in Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, but I've been to almost every Middle Eastern country and worked closely with the services and the governments of those
Apart
countries.
from Iran.
So apart from Iran, I have great affinity for the Arab people. That's not the truth at the White House. The White House, the State Department, and especially the Congress. It's the Congress, and by extension, the foreign policy community, that is almost under the control of AIPAC. In my very first week in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I was the senior investigator there working for John Kerry. My very first week, two men came to my office, which was not unusual. People would come all the time. And they said, oh, we want to welcome you to Capitol Hill. Like I had never been on Capitol Hill before. We want to welcome you to Capitol Hill. We're the representatives from AIPAC. Anything you want, you just call us and let us know. But the reason why we're here, they said, is we want to offer you an all expenses paid trip to the Holy Land. They didn't say Israel. They said the Holy Land. And we'll take you on a personal tour to all the Christian holy sites. I said, thank you, but no thank you. If I want to go to Israel, I'll pay my own way to Israel. Oh, no. Well, all expenses paid. We're friends. I said, no, please leave. There's no point in us having this conversation. I turned it down. My boss turned it down. Almost everybody else accepted the trip. And of course, it's a complete propaganda trip. So they give you gifts and they take you to the finest restaurants and you drink Israeli wine every night and you stay in the best hotels and you have private tours of this site and that site and the other site. And then they grab you. And I'll give you one other example. This is one of the reasons why at the CIA we hated the Israelis. The very first briefing that I ever gave as a junior analyst, I had been on the job about 3 months, and I was instructed to give the Israeli intelligence representatives in Washington a briefing on Saddam Hussein's psychological state. This was the analytic team that I was working on. So there were about 10 of us in this briefing, plus the Mossad representative and the Shin Bet representative. So because I was the junior most analyst, I went last. All my 9 other colleagues went first, and we went around the table. Now, we did not brief the Israelis in CIA headquarters. The Israelis are not permitted to come into CIA headquarters. It's because every time they come, they bring gifts, and the gifts always have microphones inside. And so we told them, you can't do this. Every time you come here, you try to bug the conference room. And so we don't allow them in the building anymore. We have an office off-site, and the only thing we do there is meet with the Israelis. So we went around the table. Each analyst gave his briefing. And when it came to me, we have to start the briefing with our name and what we're briefing on. So because I was an overt employee, I said, my name is John Kiriakou, and I'm going to brief you today on Saddam Hussein's psychological state. And the Shin Bet representative had his glasses like this, and he says to me, spell your name. So I spell it. And then he says, you are Jewish? And I said, I am not recruitable. Don't even think about trying to recruit me. How dare you? It made me so angry. And so I gave the briefing. And when we went back to headquarters, all my colleagues were laughing. And they said, the Israelis do that to every one of us. They're constantly trying to spy on us and to recruit us. So there's this real dislike of the Israelis inside CIA headquarters. But if you're on Capitol Hill or at the White House or at the State Department, you're getting free trips to Israel, you're getting wined and dined at the fanciest restaurants, and the Israelis in the form of AIPAC give millions and millions of dollars to American politicians to win re-election, provided that they remain pro-Israel.
So, but that takes us to a very interesting point, because now many people are speculating, saying that it is Netanyahu and it is Mossad and it is Israel which has dragged the US into all these wars, because Netanyahu went to Congress in 1995, in 2001, 2003, yes, said, let's go and attack Iraq, let's go and attack Iran, let's go and attack Libya. It seems like, I mean, they are depicting the US government and it's like appetite for creating more wars as gullible, as an innocent child, which is being dragged by this by this deceptive Israeli character. Whereas I think, I mean, the US wouldn't go to wars if it wasn't for its own interests or their understanding of its deep state. So, in a sense, do you think like CIA would sit back and allow Mossad and Netanyahu to persuade Capitol Hill and the president to start a new war, or no? I mean, at the end of the day, it is a decision made by American establishment.
No, actually, I do. Actually, I do. I can tell you, ever since the presidency of George H.W. Bush, the Israeli prime minister, whoever it happened to be, and it was usually Netanyahu, every single president was asked to bomb Iran. And every single president said, no, we're not going to do that. It got to the point where Barack Obama was so sick and tired of Netanyahu coming here and saying, you have to bomb Iran for us, that they stopped meeting. Netanyahu would come to Washington and wouldn't even be invited to the White House. That's how bad the relationship was. But Netanyahu always knew that he had a home on Capitol Hill, that he could go to almost any member of Congress, whether it was a Democrat or a Republican, and receive a hero's welcome. Because there are millions of Jews who vote, millions of Jews who open their checkbooks and send money to these political figures. And so he knew that Jewish voters, especially among Democrats, were the backbone of these political parties, the two political parties that we have here in the United States. And so I think he finally got a president in Donald Trump who, on the one hand, was weak and couldn't stand up like other American presidents, and was so reflexively pro-Israel that He didn't have any problem saying yes to this request to bomb. And at the same time, this is a president who is already a lame duck. He cannot run for re-election, and so he's concerned about his legacy. I think he was trying to assess, does he really want to be the anti-war president that the MAGA Republicans and the Democratic left want him to be? Or does he want to be the tough American who started an uprising in Iran just by launching a few bombs and led to the overthrow of the Iranian government? I think that's what the calculus was. I think this is all about, well, it's a combination. For the Israelis, it's about Israeli power in American politics. For Donald Trump, it's about his legacy as a tough guy.
Okay, and so let's just go to the next question. Trump didn't consult Congress, and you
No.
believe that Congress is the one which is in the pocket of Israeli government. But he didn't consult Congress before launching these strikes. Is this another case of executive overreach, or is this just how modern American presidents have all operated when it comes to war making, especially when intelligence is involved?
Yeah, the answer is yes to both of those questions. So, on the one hand, sure, it was executive overreach because the law is absolutely 100% clear. A president cannot attack another country without the authorization of Congress. Clear. It's an impeachable offense. But nobody's ever been impeached for this, ever. We have not declared war on a country since December the 8th, 1941, when we declared war on Japan and Germany at the start of World War II. It just doesn't happen. We have fought Korea, we have fought Vietnam, we fought Grenada and Panama and Iraq again and Afghanistan, and there's never been a declaration of war. Never. Congress has essentially conceded the power to oversee these kinds of armed conflicts. And so this past week, what we saw was a handful of Democrats who really only cared because Donald Trump happens to be a Republican. And they didn't say, well, what we need is a congressional declaration of war. What they said is, well, we need to invoke the War Powers Act, which prevents the president from committing troops, and we should probably have a resolution on the use of force. Okay, where are these pieces of legislation? Are we just going to sit around and talk about them? Or is somebody going to finally step up and say, wait a minute, the Constitution is clear. You cannot bomb another country without congressional approval. And congressional approval can only come when there is what the Constitution calls a clear and present danger to the United States. And Iran does not pose a clear and present danger.
So what's going to happen legally at this stage? Are they going to go to Congress now for the rest of it? Is Congress going to have a session and ask Trump to stop at this stage and not escalate any further? What's your prediction, and what is usually the legal procedure in Congress in such case?
Well, if the sum total of the American involvement is what we saw yesterday, these B-2 bombings, then it's over on Capitol Hill. The whole point is finished. If Donald Trump intends to continue bombing, or God forbid, to send troops, then Congress will have to get involved. But, it's going to be one of those situations, Ali, where 95% of Americans believe that we're the good guys. No matter what happens, no matter how this started, we're the good guys. And so whatever the president asks for, Congress is going to approve it. That's the situation that we find ourselves in. There have been so many years, decades of propaganda against the Iranian government that any American, almost every American, would support going to war with Iran. I know that sounds crazy, but that's public opinion in the United States after years and years and years of propaganda.
So let me just take you to inside Trump's own establishment and his team. What happened to Tulsi Gabbard? Because she was very strongly stating that there is no evidence that Iran is after making a bomb. And she stood by this in a very principled way. And she was quite impressive until suddenly she was not 2 days
Until
ago.
she
and
was
she's
not.
completely like twisted and she went to the other pole. What happened? And I mean, how does it work? What's the mechanism? I mean, is it that easy?
Well,
because in a sense, she needs some evidence. There are some procedure. There are bureaucrats there. There are many people involved. There are analysts. There are information. How can like the head of NSA suddenly decide to change her institutional opinion overnight?
Yeah. Welcome to the United States government. I have friends in the administration, in the White House, in the intelligence services. And just as recently as 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was told that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is not really working out very well, and that he'll probably last about a year. And then the president intended to name Tulsi Gabbard as the Secretary of Defense until last week. Tulsi Gabbard has been very clear in her testimony on Capitol Hill that not just the CIA, but all 17 American intelligence services have concluded unanimously that the Iranian government does not have a nuclear weapons program and does not seek to have a nuclear weapons program. Donald Trump said that was not the answer he wanted to hear. He wanted to hear that Iran was working on a bomb. And she said, there's no evidence that Iran is working on the bomb. And the way I heard the story yesterday, he told her, if you want to keep your job, Iran is working on a bomb. And so she flipped her position, despite all the intelligence, saying that there is no Iranian nuclear weapons program. And she said, okay, Iran is working on a bomb. And so Trump said, well, Iran's working on a bomb. The director of national intelligence just said so. I have to bomb Iran to stop this program. Forgive me that sounds so cynical, but that's life in Washington. That's just the way it is.
But I remember, I mean, when Trump came to power in the first round, Condoleezza Rice, as a critique of Trump, said, I'm not worried because it will be a test for the strength of US government's checks and balances. And at least Americans were proud that if Trump wants to do something crazy, anti-constitutional, the other aspects and the other cogs in the machine will stop him. But it seems that, I mean, the checks and balances are not working. We have entered the circus phase in which the head of NSA can just say, yes, man. Trump is turning heads of institutions into yes men, and that's very dangerous for future of America. Do you think?
Incredibly dangerous. I've long been on record as saying, as an example, that I think it's a terrible mistake to have a military officer as the head of the CIA, a general or an admiral. And we've had 5, 6, 7 of them over the years that have been generals and admirals. And the reason I think that's a mistake is because they've become generals, they've become admirals by spending 30 years saying, yes, sir. We don't want somebody who says, yes, sir. We want somebody to say, Mr. President, that is a terrible idea. And let me tell you why it's a terrible idea. You need somebody with the strength to tell the president when he's wrong. And under Donald Trump, we don't have those people. He only surrounds himself with yes men. He only surrounds himself with people who will support and endorse the ideas and the programs that he has. Now, on Capitol Hill, it's even worse. This MAGA, Make America Great Again movement, this is a cult. It's a cult of personality where you're either pro-Trump or you're anti-American. And there's no middle ground there. And so Republicans don't want to be accused of being anti-American. And so they jump in with Trump, whether it's a bill in Congress, and this is actually a real thing happening right now, a bill in Congress to rename Greenland to red, white, and blue land, seriously, or to bomb Iran. And so the only check and balance that's left is the courts. And not only, I mean, is the Supreme Court sort of out of the picture because Donald Trump has taken it over by appointing 3 Supreme Court justices. It's the lower courts, that we have to rely on. We need a complete re-examination of the way the American government works, because the founding fathers in the late 18th century, when they gave us the Constitution and they set up this form of government, made sure that all three branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, were of equal power and equal authority. Well, now that is clearly not the case. The president is the leader of the country. Congress does whatever he tells them to do, and the courts do their best to try to rein him in.
It is a very strange but very fast paced towards a form of authoritarianism, and
very much so,
which is very kind of worrying, because given America's level of military power and economic power and its influence on the rest of the world, on environment, on its ability to create wars, I think is not only a damage to American people, it can be very damaging for the future of the planet. But let's go on, because you were recently interviewed by Tucker Carlson, given, like you mentioned, MAGA, and one of the few MAGA figures openly critical of American wars. And I personally have a lot of respect for Tucker myself. Do you think voices like his and the MAGA base in general actually have any influence on restraining Trump's foreign policy? Or are they more often just part of the performance and they're not going to be able to stop it?
Yeah, I spoke to Tucker 2 weeks ago as part of that interview, and he said what you just said, that it seemed like the MAGA base was losing its power, was losing its influence with Donald Trump. And I said, no, surely you have to be wrong. And he said, I don't think I'm wrong. I'm feeling like the neoconservatives are actually ascendant. Their power is increasing. And he was right. I was wrong. Donald Trump, there's a real fight within the Republican Party right now, and I think it's a very important one internationally, in that it's a fight between the non-interventionist Make America Great Again base and the neoconservative pro-military, let's attack everybody tradition of the Republican Party. For a while, I thought the party had shifted and that Donald Trump had forced the shift, and this was a new Republican Party. And now, after the last week or two, I think that analysis was wrong. I think that the neocons are here to stay. They recognize Donald Trump is going to be gone in 3.5 years, and they're going to take over the party again. The problem for Americans, the problem really for the rest of the world, is the Democrats are just as pro-war as the Republicans are. And so there is no viable peace movement in the United States. There is no political party that we can turn to that's non-interventionist or that wants to stress diplomacy instead of war fighting. And so I think that the MAGA base is increasingly weak and is unable right now to constrain Donald Trump and the neocons.
That's quite worrying. I mean, so the only thing which is left to hope to stop him and restrain him is his sense as a businessman, because by now we know that he was never anti-war, despite all his performances and his claims. He was anti-expensive wars, because Afghanistan war cost America $2 trillion, and Iraq war $4 with the interest and the bank interest, as Trump claims, $6 trillion, altogether $8 trillion. So if he, in his mind, if he can manage a war with a few bunker buster bombs, go in and out, surgical enough, and then put a medal on his chest, he would love to do that. Actually, he's super warmonger. So which authority in the country, which institution within America, which part of American society can relate to him that actually if Iraq war cost America $6 trillion, a war with Iran would cost them $60 trillion? Which institution should we hope that give him this information and wake him up and sober him up to reality?
Honestly, I think the only people with the authority to do it are those Republicans close enough to him to whisper in his ear. There's this there's this
This is
belief in
court
Washington
politics,
that
yeah?
it is. That's exactly what it is. It's court politics. It's right out of the 17th century. There's this belief in Washington that I think is true, that that Trump listens to the last person that he spoke to. And so people will talk to him all day, but the most recent thing that he heard, that's what he runs with. He's not a deep thinker. He doesn't care about analysis. He is very impulsive in his decisions. And I think that he needs to hear from the Senate Majority Leader, the Speaker of the House. I would tell you the Secretary of State, but he's a neocon. That this is really the wrong thing to do. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is a huge country, both in terms of population and in terms of land mass. It's a strong country. Its internal politics are largely unified. And one of the other things that so many Americans don't understand, all the way up to presidents of the United States, I saw this with my own eyes at the CIA, is that not every country in the world sees us as the good guys. Not every country in the world wants to be liberated by the American military. I've told the story in podcasts a number of times that the night before the U.S. launched the Iraq War, I was the note taker in what's called a principals meeting. I was the note taker for George Tenet, who was the CIA director. The meeting was chaired by Vice President Cheney. It was Condoleezza Rice was there, and the National Security Advisor, and the Secretary of Defense, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Commander in Chief of CENTCOM, and one of the National Security Council deputy advisors said, as soon as we cross the border tomorrow, the Iraqi people are going to throw flowers at us. And I was like, flowers? And I said to the deputy director of the CIA, I said, do these people know nothing about history? Do they know nothing about the Middle East? And he said, no, they know nothing. To think they would throw flowers at us. Well, there is a contingent at the CIA, at the State Department, at the Defense Department, and especially at the White House, that if we were to decide to liberate Iran, the Iranian people would throw flowers at us. And that's just a fantasy.
So I believe you were in CIA in 2001 when September 11 happened. And so you know this very famous piece of video which has been circulated many times, but I think it's like timely to look at because by Wesley Clark. So if you allow me, I'm just going to like run it for a second.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you."
I'm sorry, what did you say his name was?
I'm not going to give you his name.
So go through the countries again.
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran.
So this is 2001, and we, especially in the anti-war movement, we constantly talk about the fact that America has made these mistakes, has gone in and out. But in a sense, there's another reading that they actually achieved what they wanted. What Rumsfeld said, what neocons said, actually has come to reality. And if you look at it from the fact that they were not looking for, they're not looking to do like nation building. They were not there to, create pro-American governments and do that form of like imperialistic thing as it was customary before. But they went there to create a scorched earth, so to block China's reach to stable resources of oil, and so to destroy this region, which doesn't have much benefit for America anymore, especially given America has access to shale oil. I think I think neocons have accomplished their mission if they manage to turn Iran into another destabilized region, and if they manage to create a big war, which I think Iran is not Iraq or Somalia or Sudan or Syria or Lebanon or Libya. Iran is a different story, and it would be the quagmire for them. It will swallow them up. But in a sense, what's your read? Don't you think that they finally managed to, despite different presidents and things, these neocons have managed to get what they wanted?
Oh, I do. They've succeeded in creating chaos and havoc in 6 of those 7 countries, with Iran being the last one. Everything that General Wesley Clark said in that interview was true. When I returned from Pakistan in 2002 to CIA headquarters, I became the executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director. And so I was what's called read into these various compartments, classified at levels above top secret. And and the first thing they told me was that we were planning to overthrow the Iraqi government. It would take place in a little less than a year, and we would kill Saddam Hussein. We would install a pro-American government, and we would establish.
2001. When is that? 2001.
That was in February of 2002. Yeah. So I was a little bit late to the game because I was busy fighting Al-Qaeda first. But yeah, that was the plan. And the plan has
there any
largely
talk about
succeeded.
attacking Iran as well? Was it any conversation about attacking Iran after that?
Oh,
because February 2002 is like, in end of January 2002, George Bush called Iraq, Iran, and North Korea axis of evil. So did you hear
That's
anything
right.
about like attacking Iran and the plans about attacking Iran at the time or not?
Yeah, in that same meeting that I just told you about a few minutes ago, where I was the note taker for George Tenet, General Tommy Franks, who was the commander of Central Command, said in his briefing, his words were, "If all goes well, we can be in Tehran by August." And George Tenet turned around and he said to me, "Did he say Tehran or did he say Baghdad?" And I said, "He said Tehran." And he said, "Have these people lost their minds?" And then at the end of the meeting, I went back to my office and the deputy director said, "How was the meeting?" And I said, "Did you know we were going to attack Iran?" And he said, "Are they still talking about that? We're not going to attack Iran. We don't have the wherewithal to attack Iran." He said, "That's just those White House people. They don't know what they're talking about." But the conversation, this was in 2003. This was February of 2003, was to attack Iran sometime later that year. Because remember, they were going to throw flowers on us in Iraq, and it was going to be the land of milk and honey for the American military. So they would just turn east and go to Iran, and then the Iranians would throw flowers on us.
So if Iraq hadn't become a kind of complicated, difficult situation for America, and if it wasn't for the Iraqi insurgency, you think attacking Iran would definitely have happened much earlier?
Oh, I do. I do. The Bush administration was the most neoconservative administration in American history. They were perfectly happy to attack anybody. And they were also perfectly happy to perpetuate the lie that all of these countries had something to do with 9/11 and Al-Qaeda.
Okay, so let's just get you back to the current situation and ask you, what are the scenarios to get out of this? Because, in a sense, Iran has promised to definitely respond to America's violation of its borders. So what will happen? Because in a sense, how much of Trump's actions are bluff and how much it is, now he has to save face, because a similar situation happened with Ansarullah in Yemen a couple of months ago. And despite the fact that Ansarullah is not as strong as Iran, but Trump backed off. So what are the scenarios that you can imagine will come out of this? If Iran responds by attacking American bases, if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz and the price of oil kind of increase sharply, or if Iran doesn't respond directly, but then either get out of NPT or quietly move on towards making a bomb?
Yeah, this is a very tough question, because if you are an American president looking for some kind of response that you can declare victory with, I'm not seeing any. First of all, Iran has to respond. At the very least, to save face, Iran has to respond. What the response is going to be the big question. If the response is, for example, to use a cutout like Kataib Hezbollah to launch rockets at an American base, okay, no big deal. No big deal. If the response is to attack, let's say, the American naval base in Bahrain or the air base in Qatar, or to attack American civilians, or to blow up an American embassy or something, okay, it's just going to get worse. This thing with Ansarullah, what appears to be some sort of agreement that the White House came to with Ansarullah, it enraged the Israelis, because the agreement was, you don't attack American ships or American military ships, and we won't bomb you. The Israelis were furious because they were cut out of it. Well, 2 weeks ago, we didn't care what the Israeli position was. Now, all of a sudden, we do care what the Israeli position is. So I think if the Iranian response is something short of a major attack on American personnel and short of closing the Straits of Hormuz, I think there probably won't be an American counter response. But I'll admit to you, Ali, I'm not optimistic right now. The Iranians have to respond, if only to keep their own people placated. You know, if a country attacked me, if the Russians came and bombed American bases here in the United States, I'm 60 years old and I would want to go fight the Russians. So, I mean, why would we expect the Iranians to be any different? They've been attacked repeatedly. So there has to be some sort of response. I just don't know what the American counter response would be.
Because Iran has shown a lot of restraint, and that has become part of their strategy. I mean, if you know, it's called strategic patience. General Qasem Soleimani was assassinated, and Iran responded by attacking Ain al-Assad, but refrained from killing any American personnel, because that's right. Push America to respond again, and that would escalate out of hand. But then it seems that at this stage, I mean, if Iran shows more strategic patience, it has endangered its deterrence, because then Trump will go in and out. I mean, Iran's sky becomes like Syrian sky. Trump can just bomb whenever it wants, and that's really become damaging to Iranian deterrence. And this is happening 9 days after Iran has actually experienced a war. I mean, my family in Iran, my friends and relatives, if this was a year ago, they would say, okay, I mean, Trump's attack hasn't really done much. It seems to be a theatric. So we can actually show strategic patience. We don't want a war. We don't want our infrastructure to be damaged. But day 9 and day 10 of a real war that Israel has started has turned Iranian nation into a different nation. So my question is, what kind of intelligence do you think Trump has received? Is it possible that Iranian opposition, like Iraqi opposition, like Ahmad Chalabi's, who told Americans that, mate, go inside, Iraqis will love you, will put carpet under your feet, which actually some of them did at the beginning. Shiites in South did that, I mean, because they thought Saddam has destroyed their life. Are there that kind of intelligence that they have received and they deceived them? Because right now I can tell you with certainty, Iranian society was so divided 9 days ago and is so unified that I haven't seen that in my 48 years of life. Wow. And so if now America, now that America has attacked Iran, a big portion of Iranian society will support Iranian government to go after Americans or even go all the way to make the bomb. And I think if Iran makes a bomb, I mean, remember that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were called Fat Boy and Short Boy, I think, yeah? And I think this is going to be called Blonde Boy, because this is like really a bomb dedicated to Trump, because he forced Iran to make a bomb, and this bomb should be called after him. Iran didn't want to make a bomb at all until last night. I mean, it was not in the intention. They really didn't want it. But now I think Trump really forced them, pushed them. And I think that's why this bomb should be called after him. So what's your thought? Is it possible that Iranian opposition or people who are deluded or Israeli infiltrators, people like those who work in FDD, they are the ones who gave wrong information, false information about the state of Iranian society to Trump administration?
Yeah, the so-called Iranian opposition, at least the Iranian opposition that is in the West, is it's a joke of an opposition. We see video, for example, of this clown Reza Pahlavi at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, for example, in the pay of the Israelis. Miriam Rajavi, she's a cult leader. And surrounds herself now with American neoconservatives, important ones, Americans with influence and money, but she's just a cult leader. These aren't legitimate Iranian opposition figures. I don't think there is any external Iranian opposition that the West could use to prop up, like they thought they could do with that lying criminal Ahmed Chalabi 20 years ago, or even 30 years ago. So I think that the United States is going to be sorely disappointed. And let me agree with you on these 2 points. Number one, if anything, Iranian society is now unified, right? As American society was unified on September 12th, 2001. They've been attacked. They pulled together for the sake of the country. Number one. Number two, this is an ongoing theme in U.S. foreign policy. It's very easy to bomb somebody. The hard part is what your exit strategy is. You can't just bomb and then go home and hope for the best. There has to be something that comes after, whether it's more bombing or a ground war or diplomacy. Donald Trump, I think, foolishly believes that he has so frightened the Iranians and so rattled the Iranian government that he's going to now force them to go to the negotiating table. That's not at all what's going to happen. If I were the president of Iran, I would pull out of the NPT. Because what has the NPT done for me? The Israelis aren't in the NPT, and the Israelis have how many nuclear weapons? We don't even know how many nuclear weapons the Israelis have. So if I were the Iranian president, I would conclude that I needed nuclear weapons to protect my country, because Iran is under nuclear threat from Israel and now apparently from the United States.
So I had an interview with Scott Ritter, that former UN weapons inspector, and he believes that the moment Iran goes after nuclear weapon, the moment that Iran leaves NPT and there's a real evidence that Iran has started to make the bomb, America will start nuking left and right of the country, will destroy every form of infrastructure, and not this kind of theatrics, real war, and then B-2s are going to bomb the hell out of Iran. Do you think that like apocalyptic end of time scenario, is it really feasible? I mean, is it possible for an American president to just nuke a country out of the world? I mean, because I know America did nuke Japan, but that was the end of war in which Japan had no allies anymore. All the allies were already surrendered and destroyed, and the world order would allow such a thing. But in a world in which we are in transition, do you think America would be able to do so?
I don't. We learned such a terrible lesson with the bombing of Japan. What a horrible, horrible legacy it is. The United States is the only country in the history of humanity to use nuclear weapons against another people. And it's something that many Americans are ashamed of, having this ignominious position as the only country in the world to nuke civilians. Nuclear weapons are so massive and so horrible that they almost can't be controlled. And I can't imagine any scenario whatsoever where the United States uses nuclear weapons against Iran. I think Scott is overstating his belief. I can't imagine. But besides the fact that would be an invitation for the Russians and the Chinese to rush to Iran's defense. So I can't imagine it happening.
And also, it's like makes it legitimate for Russia and China to use nuclear in Ukraine and in Taiwan and
That's
other
right.
places. So,
That's
in a
exactly
sense,
right.
I mean, even Putin. I mean, few times he reached out to the verbal threat of using tactical nuke, but then that was it never went further than his mouth, and he
Yes.
never even moved, kind of pretend to prepare for this. But the irony is, Trump really, given what you said before about Obama, Trump is really in this like ego competition with Obama, and he really wants his Nobel Peace Prize. And
Yes, he's obsessed.
he's obsessed with Nobel Peace Prize. I think, you know what, in Iran, any brand that you want Gucci, you can buy, because a fake Gucci you can buy for $50, yeah? And there are places in Iran that they sell you brands in meter. So you can buy a meter of Gucci brand, you can add to whatever you want, Prada, anything you want, yeah? And I think someone should forge a fake Nobel Peace Prize for Trump to just calm him down and stop his this suffering on behalf of his ego. But let's just move up from that to the last question. And the last question is, this is this amazing tweet, which was from about 6 months ago, if I'm not mistaken. It's about, that's right, 27th of November, sorry, 27th of October 24, yeah? So you've been talking about
Crazy.
how CIA is involved in how the intelligence agencies shape media narratives. In this case, how do you think the story of Iran strike is being managed? Are we watching another round of manufactured consent for military action? And how easy is that? Because when we had WMD in Iraq in 2003, that was a long time in which Saddam Hussein had not cooperated with UN inspectors. And he also had a long record of using chemical weapons against people in Halabja, in Kurdistan and things. You cannot suddenly come out and create and manufacture a kind of narrative. So what is the narrative for you, from your point of view as an ex-CIA officer? What's the narrative that Americans are using to justify this attack, or justify widening this attack into an all-out war? And do you think it's working or not? Because a lot of it goes back to woman life freedom. A lot of it goes back to women liberation. We had a little of this in Afghanistan, but if it's possible, talk a little about CIA and other intelligence agencies' role in manufacturing consent and creating narrative.
Oh yeah, I think most Americans, 90% plus, believe that Iran had nuclear weapons or was building nuclear weapons, and we had to stop them because the president said so. Most Americans, they don't pay attention to these issues. They don't really care about foreign policy. They don't care what's happening to or in other countries. In fact, fewer than 50% of Americans even own a passport. They couldn't find even the United States on a map, let alone Iran or other countries. And so they don't care. They read in the paper that we bombed Iran, we bombed nuclear sites, and it's because the president said Iran is building a nuclear weapon that, God forbid, they're going to use against us someday. So if the president said so, it must be true. That's the narrative. Now, that narrative, the response to that narrative would be different if the next thing the president said was that we need to commit ground troops, for example, or if this was a sustained bombing campaign where the B-2s are making trips between Missouri and Iran, with regularity. That would be different. But I think people just genuinely believe what they're told without any question. They just accept it.
So they don't need narrative.
I don't think they do. I don't think they need a narrative.
I mean, but still, you need to persuade your European partners. You still need to give something, withdraw something to Democrats.
But that's what's different this time compared to previous times. There were no European partners, right? We went to the British, the Canadians, the French, the Germans. We went to all of them at the G7. Literally none of them were interested in helping us to bomb Iran. None of them.
Did you go to them?
Oh yeah. In fact,
really?
Not only did Trump talk to them at the G7, but after Trump returned from the G7, Marco Rubio called the foreign ministers of all seven of the G7 countries to say, this is what we're planning to do. None of them announced support for the US, and several of them said that it was clear to them in that phone call that the American policy had changed 180 degrees, because before the G7, Trump was telling them, we're not going to attack Iran. And then after the G7, Marco Rubio said, oh, we're going to attack Iran.
So they were looking for, a brother in crime, comrade in crime.
Partner in crime.
Partner
Yes.
in crime. And none of them accepted that. So why all of them are like somehow they're keeping the line. So Keir Starmer and David Lammy, they are talking about finding Iran's nuclear project extremely dangerous. None of them, of course, condemn America, but they're all like somehow supporting and helping, because saying that Iran should accept negotiation about everything, a full package, talking about missiles, Iran's regional partners and allies and everything else. So it seems that to some extent it is coordinated with Europeans, even though Europeans don't want to make their hands directly dirty. So my question to you is, how far Europeans would go if Iran attacks America? Would they come to support America, or no? They just would only use words and not go fully involved, wouldn't get fully involved? Because as you know, UK has about 10, 15 military bases in the region, all of them in the reach of Iranian missiles. And so, if they attack Iran, Iran will attack them back as well. And also like UK has a lot of interest in the Persian Gulf region, in Emirates, in Saudi traditionally. So they are there to lose. How far would they go? Would they go as far as they went with the Iraq war? And would they make their hand dirty not to leave America alone, or things have changed since then?
No, I think they're not willing to commit troops unless, of course, let's say Iran decides to attack the British bases, or decides to attack Cyprus, the British base in Cyprus, or hit British interests in Bahrain or the Emirates. That might be a little bit different. But in terms of voluntarily committing ground troops like they did in Iraq, or do bombing runs like they did in Iraq, I just can't imagine. They get nothing out of it. I think the Iranian government would be smart in keeping this between Iran and Israel in the United States. There's no reason to draw other countries into it. And, like you said at the beginning of our talk, this is very, very expensive. And they don't want to bear the cost of another endless war. It's just not worth bankrupting your economy over. They get nothing out of it.
Okay. And then very final question. Trump yesterday mentioned Iran has killed hundreds of thousands of people in the region. They are the ones who killed our soldiers in Iraq. So he tried to reach into American patriotism and remind them of the American boys who got killed in Iraq, and put all the burden and all the blame on Iran. Do you think these kind of narratives would work? Would they work to, you believe that Americans don't need anything to be persuaded, and they buy what president give them full-heartedly. But what do you think, given there's 45 years of Iran phobia and propaganda against Iran, films like Not Without My Daughter, constant images of like Iranian government suppressing the young people. And so having depicted Iran as a pariah state, as a dictatorship and thing, are they all going to be used now to help Trump in his war? Or, these things wouldn't work anymore after Iraq and Afghanistan war.
I don't think so. We've been at war for generations. We've been at war my entire life. And like I said, I'm 60 years old, and I don't recall a period where we haven't been at war. Maybe for a minute in the 1970s. but we're always at war. This crazy statement that Trump made in the White House yesterday about Iran killing hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of Americans, I think that just goes right past most people. Trump is known for lying, for throwing out what he calls facts that just aren't based in any reality. He says things like this every single day, and I think people are hardened to it. They just don't really believe these details anymore.
John Kiriakou, thank you very much for your time, and I hope to see you again in Jedaal TV channel. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Pleasure's mine. Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Ali Alizadeh. Thanks for joining me on Deep Focus, and please do me a favor. Remember to hit like and subscribe. It really would mean a lot to me. All the best.